You know, there's something deeply strange happening in our world today. We are more connected than ever before. Instant messages, video calls, social media bringing us face to face with hundreds, even thousands of people. And yet so many of us feel absolutely drained, exhausted, empty, as if our very life force is being pulled out of us. Now, most people will tell you this is just stress. They'll say it's the pace of modern life, or too much screen time, or not enough sleep. But what if it's something else entirely? What if there are certain types of people who, whether they know it or not, are literally feeding off your energy? Alan Watts understood this phenomenon deeply. He recognized that not all human interactions are equal. Some people, when you're around them, leave you feeling lighter, more alive, more yourself. But others leave you feeling hollow. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to recognize the 5 types of people who drain your energy, not so you can judge them or hate them, but so you can protect what is most precious, your inner peace, your vitality, your very essence. Because here's what most people never realize. Protecting your energy isn't selfishness, it's survival. Now, before we dive into these 5 types, we need to understand something fundamental about human interaction. Every relationship, every conversation, every encounter is an exchange of energy. Think about it. When you talk to someone genuinely happy, their joy is contagious. When you're around someone deeply peaceful, you feel calmer. This isn't mystical nonsense. This is observable reality. Energy transfers between people, whether we acknowledge it or not. But here's where it gets interesting. Some people have learned, consciously or unconsciously, to take energy rather than exchange it. They're not evil. They're not monsters. But they have developed patterns of being that require them to feed off the emotional, mental, and spiritual resources of others. Watts would say they're like black holes. Everything goes in, but nothing comes out. And if you're a naturally giving person, if you're empathetic, if you're what some might call spiritually sensitive, you're a prime target. Not because you're weak, but because you're powerful. Your energy is rich, vibrant, alive. And certain types of people are drawn to that like moths to a flame. So let's identify them, not to condemn them, but to see them clearly. Because once you see them, they lose their power over you. The first type is what I call the emotional vampire. And you've met them. Perhaps you're dealing with one right now. The emotional vampire is someone who is always in crisis. Always. There is never a moment of peace in their life. If it's not a relationship drama, it's a work catastrophe. If it's not a health scare, it's a financial disaster. The content changes, but the pattern never does. Now here's what makes them so draining. They don't actually want solutions. They want an audience. They want someone to absorb their chaos, to carry their emotional weight, to validate their suffering. You can spend 3 hours listening to them, offering advice, providing support, and they'll nod. They'll thank you. They might even cry. But then 2 days later, the exact same crisis happens again, or a new one emerges, and they're back at your door, needing you to once again drop everything and hold space for their turmoil. Watts would ask you this: what are they doing with your energy? Are they using it to heal, to grow, to change? Or are they simply using you as an emotional dumping ground, a way to temporarily relieve the pressure without ever addressing the underlying issue? I knew a woman once who had a friend like this. Every week, same coffee shop, same pattern, 2 hours of crisis talk, and for years this woman showed up. She thought she was being a good friend. She thought she was helping. Until one day she had her own crisis. Her mother fell ill. She needed support. And do you know what happened? The friend was suddenly unavailable, too busy, too overwhelmed with her own problems. That's when she realized this wasn't a friendship. It was a feeding relationship. The energy only flowed one direction. The emotional vampire doesn't want to change. They've built their entire identity around their suffering. And when you try to help them escape it, you're actually threatening who they are. Your energy is not a renewable resource for others to waste. And until they're ready to take responsibility for their own emotional state, anything you give them will be poured into a bottomless pit. The second type is more subtle, more insidious. I call them the competitive spirit. These are people who cannot simply be happy for you. Every conversation becomes a comparison. You share good news, and within seconds, they've turned it into a story about themselves. You accomplish something, and they have to one-up you. You're struggling with something, and they're struggling more. It's exhausting because you can never just exist around them. You're always in a contest you didn't sign up for, always being measured, evaluated, compared. Watts understood that this type of person is operating from deep insecurity. They've tied their worth to being better than, and when you're thriving, it threatens their fragile sense of self, so they have to diminish you. Not always overtly, sometimes it's subtle, a comment here, a correction there, a way of making your achievements seem smaller. What makes this particularly draining is that you start monitoring yourself around them. You start downplaying your success. You start hiding your joy because you know that sharing it will either be met with competition or dismissal. I remember reading about a man who got a promotion at work. Naturally, he was excited. He'd worked hard for years, so he told his brother, expecting celebration. Instead, his brother spent 20 minutes explaining why the promotion wasn't actually that impressive, how he'd achieved something similar at a younger age, and how the real challenge would be keeping the position. Not once did he say congratulations. Not once did he acknowledge the accomplishment. The entire conversation became about him. This is what the competitive spirit does. They colonize your joy. They make your moments about them, and every interaction leaves you feeling somehow less than. Here's what you need to understand. Their insecurity is not your responsibility to manage. You do not need to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. You do not need to hide your light so they're comfortable in their darkness. The competitive spirit will drain you because you'll constantly be managing their ego instead of living your life. And until they do their own inner work, until they find worth within themselves rather than through comparison, they will continue to see you as a threat rather than a companion. Now we come to the third type, the entitled taker. And this one is particularly difficult because they often disguise themselves as victims. The entitled taker believes the world owes them. They believe your help is not a gift, but an obligation. And no matter how much you give, it will never be enough because they don't see it as generosity. They see it as what they deserve. What makes them so draining is the lack of reciprocity. They take your time, your money, your emotional energy, your advice. But when you need something, they're suddenly unavailable, suddenly broke, suddenly too busy. Watts would point out that this violates the fundamental law of the universe. Balance. Everything in nature is give and take. Breath in, breath out, day and night, seasons changing, but the entitled taker has removed themselves from this flow. They only take. And here's the twisted part. If you dare to stop giving, if you dare to set a boundary, they will make you the villain. You're selfish. You've changed. You're not the person they thought you were. No, what happened is you stopped playing your assigned role in their drama. I once heard a story about a man who helped a cousin financially for 2 years, paid rent, bought groceries, even helped with a car payment, never asked for anything in return, just wanted to help family. Then the man fell on hard times himself, lost a job, needed to cut back. So he explained to his cousin, "I can't help anymore right now. I need to take care of my own situation." The cousin's response? Anger, accusations. "After everything I've been through, you're abandoning me now?" Notice the framing. Everything I've been through. No acknowledgement of the help received. You're abandoning me. As if helping was a permanent obligation, not a temporary gift. This is the entitled taker. They rewrite history. They erase your generosity. They make your boundary into betrayal. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And anyone who expects you to do so is not someone who values you. They're someone who uses you. The fourth type is what I call the chaos architect. These are people who create drama, thrive in crisis, and pull everyone around them into the storm. They're different from the emotional vampire because the emotional vampire is at least somewhat passive. The chaos architect actively constructs turmoil. They stir pots. They create conflicts. They manufacture emergencies. And then they need you to help them deal with the consequences. What's so draining about the chaos architect is that you're constantly in reactive mode around them. You're always putting out fires they started. You're always mediating conflicts they created. You're always solving problems that wouldn't exist if they would just stop. Watts might say they become addicted to intensity. Peace feels like death to them. Calm feels like emptiness. So they create chaos just to feel alive. And if you're in their orbit, you become collateral damage. The chaos architect will text you at 2 a.m. with an emergency. They'll involve you in arguments that have nothing to do with you. They'll make impulsive decisions that affect everyone around them and then expect you to help manage the fallout. I knew someone who had a friend like this. Every few months, same pattern. Reckless decision, predictable crisis, desperate call for help. One time it was quitting a job without a backup plan. Another time it was a dramatic relationship confrontation. Another time it was a major purchase they couldn't afford. And every time this person would drop everything to help. Loan money, provide a place to stay, talk them through it, over and over, until one day they realized this friend didn't want stability. They wanted someone to clean up their messes so they could keep making them. The chaos architect needs an audience for their drama and a safety net for their recklessness. And as long as you provide both, they will never change. You cannot save someone from chaos they are actively creating. You can only choose whether or not to participate. The fifth and final type is the hardest to identify because they're not loud, not dramatic, not obviously problematic. I call them the silent drainer. The silent drainer doesn't ask for much. They don't create chaos. They don't compete with you. But somehow, after spending time with them, you feel depleted, heavy, tired. This is the person who never seems to have anything positive to say. The conversation is always complaints, cynicism, negativity, not dramatic, just persistently dark, like a low-grade infection that slowly weakens your system. Or they're the person who takes in tiny increments, small favors, little requests, each one insignificant on its own, but cumulatively exhausting. Or they're the person who never quite shows up for you emotionally. You can talk to them, but they're not really present. They nod, they listen, but there's no real connection. It's like talking to a wall that occasionally says, mm-hmm. Watts would recognize this as a form of spiritual vampirism. They're not attacking you. They're not even consciously draining you. But their presence, their energy, their way of being is somehow subtractive. What makes the silent drainer so challenging is that you can't point to any one thing they've done wrong. They haven't betrayed you. They haven't hurt you, obviously. But the cumulative effect of being around them is a slow erosion of your vitality. I think we've all had relationships like this. Friendships where you used to feel energized, but now you find yourself dreading their calls. Family members whose visits leave you needing 3 days to recover. Colleagues who somehow make every interaction feel heavier than it needs to be. And because they're not doing anything overtly harmful, you feel guilty for wanting distance. You feel selfish for protecting your energy. But here's what you need to understand. Not everyone is meant to have access to you. Some people, even good people, even people you care about, are simply not energetically compatible with where you are in your life. And that's okay. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to explain it. You just have to honor it. So we've identified these 5 types: the emotional vampire, the competitive spirit, the entitled taker, the chaos architect, and the silent drainer. Now here's what Watts would want you to understand. These are not evil people. They're wounded people. They're unconscious people. They're people who haven't yet learned how to generate their own energy, so they take it from others. But your compassion for their woundedness does not obligate you to sacrifice your peace. You can wish them well from a distance. You can hope they heal. You can even love them. But you do not have to give them access to your inner world. Because here's the deeper truth. When you allow people to drain you, you're not just hurting yourself. You're actually preventing them from facing the emptiness within themselves. You're becoming a crutch that keeps them from learning to walk on their own. True compassion sometimes looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like saying no. Your energy is sacred. It's the currency with which you create your life, and you must be ruthlessly protective of it. So I'll leave you with this question, the same question Watts might ask. Who in your life are you giving energy to out of guilt, obligation, or habit rather than genuine desire? And what would happen if you redirected that energy back to yourself, to your growth, to the people who actually nourish you in return? The answer to that question might just change everything. Because in the end, you're not here to be drained. You're here to shine. And sometimes shining means stepping away from those who would dim your light. If this perspective offered you clarity, you know what to do.